afternoon. It's a great way to start this session. Welcome, Jim. We're having a fireside chat. But how many of you in this room knew that the Arctic Research Foundation, a private foundation, was one of the groups that discovered the Franklin expedition? Put up your hands if you knew that ARF did that.
There you go.
It's about half the room. That's good. Today, we're going to make sure we learn a little bit more about their work, a little bit about Jim's vision for the Arctic. But let's start there, Jim.
Do I give my remarks first?
I'm going to set up the question like this. The British spent a century and a half looking for the Franklin expedition. The Americans, the Canadians, Parks Canada, the Hudson's Bay Company had 3 missions to try and find the Franklin expedition. But you and Parks Canada did it. What drove the passion for a guy from Peterborough, Ontario, to find the terror? How's that for a setup?
Do you want me to do my
Yes.
remarks first, and then we'll answer questions?
And the Arctic Research Foundation.
Yeah.
What led to that passion?
I'm supposed to do my remarks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, and thank you, Aaron, for inviting me to speak today about the Arctic Research Foundation. As you saw in the video, ARF is a nonprofit charitable foundation providing innovative infrastructure for northern communities. With investments from my foundation of over $35 million, if you got the next slide, of over $35 million to date, ARF catalyzes and coordinates scientific, cultural, and economic projects in the Arctic through partnerships with communities, governments, universities, and other research organizations. When I founded ARF, I wanted Canadian infrastructure in the Canadian waters to search for the lost Franklin expedition ships. Our vessels conducted 80% of the search for the HMS Erebus and located the HMS Terror in 2016. Since then, our mandate has changed as we endeavor to support research in the vast and challenging landscape of the Arctic through both physical and digital infrastructure. At ARF, we listen first. Our commitment extends beyond exploration. It is about fostering meaningful connections with the communities that call these remote regions home. We take great care in ensuring that our projects are community-led, focusing on delivering benefits in science, economics, employment, and culture to Northerners. Next slide, please. Our fleet is comprised of 6 shallow draft research vessels spanning sizes from 30 feet to 175 feet, which allow us to work in uncharted and understudied areas. Our seasoned crew brings years of experience to navigate and work safely in some of the most challenging conditions on Earth. At the heart of our mission is a commitment to diverse research areas, including limnology, fish migration, marine mammals, physical oceanography, biological productivity, sea ice dynamics, and marine archaeology, among others. We take pride in our specialization in hydrographic mapping, facilitating navigation, baseline ecosystem analysis, and the strategic deployment of power and telecommunication cables to remote communities. ARF's work not only expands our understanding of the Arctic, but also contributes to sustainable development and connectivity in these remote regions. Next slide. Designed to tackle the challenges of northern climates, ARF's mobile labs are built to handle the harsh conditions of the Arctic, and their modular design allows them to be adapted to almost any purpose. Built with repurposed shipping containers, they're easy to transport across the Arctic by land or sea and can be powered off-grid through renewable wind and solar generation or by hooking up to existing electrical grids. You'll find these units in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, to Johaven and Grise Fiord in Nunavut. They're used for all sorts of projects, from containerized agriculture, where fresh fruits, herbs, and vegetables are grown and distributed to local community members, to atmospheric science and water monitoring. They're even used to store human medical samples and provide dental care. At ARF, next slide please. At ARF, we believe deeply in telling northern stories. ArcticResearchFoundation.ca is a central hub brimming with insights, captivating narratives, and unfiltered scientific data. Our commitment extends beyond the web. We enlist local journalists from the north to bring firsthand perspectives on crucial topics such as science, climate change, Indigenous culture, and other Arctic matters. By combining rigorous research with authentic storytelling, we aim to foster a comprehensive understanding of the Arctic's complexity and beauty, amplifying voices from the region while ensuring the multifaceted realities of the Arctic are accurately portrayed for audiences all over the world. ARF recently launched the Arctic Research Database, a groundbreaking initiative in Canada's first free data-agnostic cross-Arctic repository for publicly accessible research data. The ARD not only facilitates the sharing of valuable science information, but also serves as a testing ground for the development and evaluation of techniques for enhancing interoperability across diverse scientific databases. Our ongoing collaboration with partners in the Arctic Data Standards Initiative is pivotal in shaping national and international standards for Arctic research data. Through ARF's commitment to innovation and collaboration, we're not just building a repository, we're laying the foundation for a robust, interconnected network that fosters transparency, accessibility, and excellence in Arctic research. Next slide, please. This past fall, ARF released its Arctic National Strategy. Prepared for federal legislators, it outlines a clear operational path forward for the Arctic through shovel-ready projects and common sense policy recommendations. Informed through our work with communities and our engagement in research, the strategy lays out 4 pillars to advance Canada's strategic engagement: reconciliation and the co-production of knowledge, protecting the environment while understanding and adapting to climate change, capacity building and economic development, and 4th, Arctic data management. ARF's work is at the core of all 4 of these pillars. We are working diligently to make meaningful progress in these realms for the benefit of the long-term sustainability of the Arctic and its peoples. I have distributed copies for each of you to explore, and I encourage you to engage and participate in this advocacy through partnership and collaboration of our team who are here. Tom, who's our CEO, could you raise your hand? It's Tom. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion with Aaron and the rest of you. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jim. I know my friend Yvonne is taking 2 copies because she's going to give Justin Trudeau an extra copy when she goes back to Ottawa. And if you have comments for Tom, he's at the back of the room. But let's start where I left off. And I guess I want to actually start by thanking you, because the leadership you've shown, $35 million from your foundation to kick off this important work.
It's only money.
It's only money, and everyone in this room particularly appreciates it. But why, for a kid from Peterborough who went to U of T, Harvard, we know the story of your track record in business as an innovator, where did your passion for the Franklin expedition and really for this Arctic research come from?
Well, thank you for the question, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. What really happened was Ban Ki-moon asked me to be the private sector representative on the UN High Panel for Sustainability for Rio Plus 20. So there was a bunch of the Connie Hedegaards and Brew Grintlands and Kevin Rudds and Susan Rices and all that. We all served together for several years. And then I got to know Johan Rockström and Eddie Carmack from that. And they did this annual tour through the Northwest Passage when the Haley and the Canadian icebreaker met to do the UNCLOS mapping. And so they called it the Philosopher's Cruise, and they said, "Do you want a free trip across the Northwest Passage?" And I said, yes. And so that's what my first time, and it's dazzling to see the place. Just everything's so vivid and vibrant, and man is so small in it. And then there was civil servants there lamenting all the Franklin issues, and we all sing Stan Rogers and all that kind of stuff as you go by King William Island. And so when I met with them and we had subsequent meetings in Ottawa, they said, we need a vessel. Because everything was kind of picking 3 or 4 days in deep water. And then you got yanked if there was an emergency or whatever. So if you had a vessel, you could just pick pieces of the puzzle off the puzzle board, right? And eventually get it all, or know that it's not there, as opposed to we got 3 days, let's cover 60% of this little area and 20% of there, but you're guessing. It's just best guesses. It's not systemic. And well, this leads to that. And here we are.
This leads to now a lifelong commitment to research, development, and education about the Arctic.
When you're doing the vessels, you're doing the bathymetry, and the bathymetry does lots of things because you're mapping it, and then you can do other kinds of sampling, and you could put people involved, and you're using so it has a way of emerging because you're filling infrastructure gaps. Sorry to jump in. So yeah, this led to that. That's the truth.
So now you've gone from, yes, I'll go on this philosopher's tour and sing Stan Rogers, to being one of the leading advocates. We've been talking about national defense and security, sovereignty, climate change, biodiversity, economic development, Indigenous reconciliation. All of them form parts of your strategy document. Which of those issues kind of keeps you up at night? You know, the climate change brought you into this in the post-Rio, the Ban Ki-moon invitation. Are we doing enough to not only plan, but to adapt and build resiliency? Which of those issues that we've been talking about is a passion for you and for ARF in the coming years?
Well, the Arctic doesn't do silos very well. So everything's everything in my observation. It's very hard to separate security from environment, from economy, from communities. So it's all a cross-cutting realm. And so if you don't think of these things cross-cutting, I think you'll make mistakes, you'll sub-optimize. And I think what I would like to, if I have one issue, it's the inattention to an actual strategy for the place. That there's a one-page framework, but there's not a strategy. And you know, I'm very involved in digital issues, and I've found that there's checks written and releases, but I'm trying to find the foundation of the basement in these things so that you can build upon it. And I would say that's my principal worry of the Arctic, or concern for the Arctic, that we'll do this, but it won't be coherent with that, or it won't have a strong foundation.
Now, Yvonne and I know there's a lot of bipartisan work on this, but it tends to ebb and flow. You know, John Diefenbaker had the Roads to Resources program. He built Inuvik, and much of the early infrastructure for the Arctic came from that vision, and then it kind of stopped for generations. What will it take for us to take your strategy and really create a 30-year plan that has the money for infrastructure, the community planning, the engagement with Inuit and Indigenous communities? Is it leadership? Is it political consensus? What do you think we need to have a strategy become a living document that we all commit to, all parties?
It's leadership. I mean, I'm not a partisan actor, but I'll call.
I used to be.
I'll call the BS when I see it, and I spare neither side. And I think there's a place for telling truth to power. There is no strategy. There is no strategy for AI in Canada. It's just they say we have a strategy, but there is no document. And I call it out. It's like, I'm not against it, but let's have a strategy. And I think in the Arctic, you need a strategy. There's a one-page framework document, and I think the world would love Canada to have a platform that science could plug into the archipelago with shared infrastructure and thoughtful data and thoughtful storytelling. We try to provide supporting infrastructure for those that want to do that. We're more supportive. We kind of lead from behind, I guess, rather than we support the scientists people become scientists in ARF, but it's more about supporting. And obviously, when you want situation awareness for security, that fits with environment as an example, and that fits with commerce as an example. So again, how do you leverage these things and solve them in a thoughtful way? I'm not saying I know the answers, but I certainly know it when I don't see a strategy. And I do think it's a leadership issue, and I don't think there's anything between Canada where it is now and really having leveraged coherent things. And it doesn't have to be about making or spending a lot of money. One thing I know is standards, and we've been very active in standards work on science data. So we have decades of science data that's all sitting in filing cabinets in different formats, and never have those been updated to a standard format where somebody can run an AI model across of it and try to find relationships. That's not money, and we've funded with my tax a bunch of students at Red River College to try to build this database, but that shouldn't be a private sector actor. That should be a government priority. Just so that you have the data there to run your models against, and then we have standards that then can link with other, because the rest of the world's done a lot of these standards, and now all of a sudden you can run broader models as an example. So not all of this is about money.
You sort of open source the data and research and allow, schools, universities, think tanks to be able to work together collaboratively.
Well, whether it's open source or not, when you buy a computer, it has a standard transport language called HTTP and a standard markup language called HTML. Not everybody can connect to everybody because you have permissions, but the potential is enabled. So we haven't even enabled the potential. Whether it's open sourced, whatever you do with it, that's a next order, but we haven't even crossed the bridge of potential, and that's your baseline data. So you got all these powerful models, but if you don't have data to work them against and train them against, then you're starting now, not 1960 or 1980 or whatever it is. So again, what I'm trying to say is these are our leadership issues, and this has been a squabble in research communities in Canada for 30, 40 years. Because why optimize when you can sub-optimize?
We specialize in that. So you're off to New York after this session. Your interest was started by some of your work with the UN. In your experience, how do our allies view Canada's commitment to the Arctic? And because we had a great panel with ambassadors this morning, but we are a major player, but are we viewed as doing our part? There's probably a lot of goodwill towards Canada, as there always is, but are we seen as leading in anywhere in terms of climate or research or?
I'm not an intellectual protagonist in the Arctic. I'm a philanthropist. I'm an intellectual protagonist in digital issues, and that's what I'm speaking at the parliamentary hearing. It's a private sector on these AI and digital things. So there I can go. So I cannot comment on how we're seen, but I'm certainly aware of the gap between what we're doing and the potential and the small amount of money. You may not be able to get to 100% of your potential with a small amount of money, but we could certainly get halfway with a very small ante. So I don't know how we're seen internationally, but I do know that I'm on the board of the Stockholm Resilience Center, so I get some of that from the people there, which is a very global board. I think they see the archipelago as a place they would love to plug into more for science. I've seen that because it's so rich for that, but what's Canada's strategy to make that as a platform for science? And in the process, how can you make that a twofer as a platform for security and a platform for economy, so make it a threefer in a way that you cooperate with communities. So I think it keeps going right back to the issue of a strategy, but I think the world would welcome more, but I'm not involved in this as an intellectual protagonist getting feedback. You all are much more than me.
One of the things I appreciate about what Jessica's been building with Arctic 360 and Madeline is this gathering so that we can share information, best practices, we can collaborate. I met Jessica when we did a study on Arctic sovereignty in the Foreign Affairs Committee in 2018, and something that struck me was one of the witnesses from Northern Quebec, an Inuk leader who had been in the Senate, Senator Charlie Watt, so some of you may know him here. He was very insistent that Ottawa, blue and red, all in between, often look at the Arctic as a park. In fact, that was his term. We are not a park. We want to live with the land, we want to be responsible stewards, but we want opportunity. And if people reach out for business partnerships, and we have a number of sessions on this, there's a real willingness by Indigenous research and resource development companies. How has ARF done partnerships on the ground, particularly in some of the smaller communities in the north? Have you been able to bring young Inuit, young people into your research programs, employ them? How has your experience been on both the research and the economic part of reconciliation?
I think Tom's speaking maybe tomorrow. He can speak more on the ground, but I know there's a hunger for the youth to be trained in how to do the science. We're using First Nations from Red River College doing the data architectures for what we're doing. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and you cannot separate economic and natural capital issues because it's generally a resource issue. And I think when you're doing situation awareness, I think you naturally have an opportunity, certainly in the water, if not in other ways, to advance security issues. So, you know, I think this is something that would warrant a rich discussion, but we've had very constructive engagement. We have lots of facilities. We do lots of enabling. There's lots of scientists on it. It supports all the things that I mentioned. I mean, it's a lot of money, but over 12 years, it's $3 million a year. Like, I think the government could afford that. So it's not that much in the scheme of what it takes to move forward, at least in certain things. So yeah, our experience has been very good and very, very close with the communities, very respectful, and we headquarter in the north. So that's our foundation is headquartered out of there. Lots of people there, and yeah, I just would rather do than advocate doing, because I think it says people, I guess we better get going, because this is embarrassing that he keeps doing it. Oh, sorry.
We need more doers
in
the country writ large. Yeah. So you operate, like Grise Fjord is pretty much as north as you can get as a community in the country.
From there.
And we've heard about the challenges of infrastructure and things like this. How have you tackled commitments? I talked to the folks here from CHARS, the High Arctic Research Station. That was one of the 3 pillars of what Stephen Harper did, and I was involved in that government. High Arctic Research Station, the road to Tuktoyaktuk, and the naval port, naval refueling station, naval something at Nanisivik. It's still not open because of that challenge of building infrastructure. The desire's there. How do you guys, from a private foundation standpoint, you know, I saw your mobile labs, you're bringing innovation. Is it just more money? Is it more patience? How do you put on these programs in some of the most remote parts of the country?
I mean, and again, Tom can give more details. I think the road was a very good idea. I think you want to do something. Was what you needed a big building in Cambridge Bay, or much more stuff that could break into the regions where the work is being done? Because if you go to the north, you tend to then go out to do your work. And so just because you want to do something big doesn't mean you're doing what's needed. I think it's much more shallow draft, much more modular. It's quite a bit less expensive, the vessels, compared to an icebreaker or a modular to that. Do you need refueling at Nanisivik? Can you create a cooperation with the Baffinland folks who already have a part? You know, everyone wants their own thing. I don't want to share your bathroom. And, I mean, that's a question. When finances are scarce, is it that strategic? And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. Is the only way to do it at a dedicated fueling at Nanisivik, or do you come down a little bit farther in Baffin Island and share it? I don't know, but yeah, I think a little bit of honest discourse and creative thinking, but scarcity an imperative can do that. So maybe this is the moment.
Yeah. If you have any questions for Jim or on their conversation, there are cards on the table. We're going to collect them in the last few minutes, ask a few. I, of course, want to get your thoughts on the geopolitical situation. I know you're a philanthropist in the Arctic, but I would love your thoughts on, with what we've seen in the war in Ukraine and Russian aggression more generally. We see China referring to itself as a near Arctic state, a diplomatic term that really didn't exist until they used it to describe themselves. We've granted transit through the Northwest Passage. We've had some discussion on, even our friends in the United States view that as an international waterway. Are we doing enough? Do we have enough presence, in your view, to properly assert our sovereignty and our domain in partnership with the rangers and communities in Inuit? But are we doing enough at a time where we're seeing old alliances fall apart, the post-World War II sort of order falling apart? Shouldn't this be an all-hands-on-deck time to show our commitment to the North?
Yeah, I mean, I've been public on this, so this is not novel for me, or not first time. I've tried to share with those that are in the policy class and pundit class that in an era of intangibles, there are no allies. It's win-loss, someone's the landlord, someone's the tenant. So you really don't have economic allies in the traditional sense of the word. And I think we had a bit of a naive conception of that in our trade agreements, which are really instruments of regulatory remote control. But we also played footsies with China, and we do have security allies. So your security allies are very, very important. But in the economy, everyone's by themselves a little bit more, which leads to strategic behavior. So you've got an economy with strategic behavior, and then you've got geopolitical upheaval in that, where you also have good old-fashioned security, bad behavior. And you've seen all the stuff about China proxying into some of Russia's roles. So to me, I think a heightened view on the strategy, the security risk is warranted. And I think that's been obvious for some time, but it needs to come about now. And how do we play in that, and how does that fit in the totality is a very, very important, whether it's over the horizon radar or using the AOPS from the Navy more, or new kinds of capacities, and then how do you pay for the place, and what's their viable economic structure? Yeah, these are very challenging issues, and I think all roads go to Canada upping its game and upping what it wants to do with that in its own sovereign economic lens and cultural lens, but also in a global environmental commons, but also an allied security infrastructure. So these are that's what I mean, it's cross-cutting. It's got trade-offs, it's got nuance, it's very technical. All roads go to playing a bigger game, a smarter game.
More self-reliance. We can't count on the old partners as much.
Certainly in economics, but I think you can count on them in security, and you have to. But then you need to cooperate on environment with people who are security contenders. So it's a very, very messy geopolitical realm for this foreseeable future, and so you've just got to be as fortified as you can for what's before you.
Yeah. The North Warning investments, I think, have been very good, and I want to thank Yvonne for her advocacy for that. Minister Anand made the commitment, and it's a positive sign that the servicing contract went to an Indigenous-led corporation, so that's an example of that procurement partnership. But as Greg said in the security panel this morning, warning lets you know what's happening. Do we have the ability to respond and to actually have a presence? As Paul said, when there's cruise ships, I heard from a ranger that they've seen snorkeling submarines and they have no idea whose they are. They report in through the chain of command, but we don't have much presence. I'll go to questions in a second, but my final, I would just love your thought, because you're interested in the environment, brought you into this, and now you've been 15 years a major thought leader, investor, philanthropist in the Arctic. Have you seen in that time the climate change through your work with ARF or even your time there? And should we be looking at more immediate investments in adaptation to make sure that some of this is happening and going to continue to happen? Should we adapt? And should that be a priority for infrastructure spending?
I think adaptation has to be part of the plan. I mean, our ability to reverse what's happening is going to take a long time, because it's like you're hot with 5 blankets on, and you just say, I'm only going to put blankets on myself more slowly in the oncoming years. Well, I need blankets off. And so I think it's inevitable. There's changes, and I think everyone in this room would talk about how the shears have changed of the cold and the wind shears, and we're seeing big variability as it lobs down here. So, yeah, I think you're going to have to think of adaptation, and I'm not saying this in a dystopian way. I just think it's a reality, and I think, again, the climate, the economy, the security, the communities, I don't think you can pull any of those things apart when you look at these. And at ARF, we try to provide supporting infrastructure. That's what we do into those that are the true frontline intellectual policy protagonist folks in these. But naturally, we have scientists on staff that support the science and publish and all that. But I like the idea of a more enabling role than that enables others.
I'm going to start with the first question, because it reminded me of how I kicked this off. Canada is an Arctic nation. However, most Canadians don't know what that means. How can we capture ordinary Canadians' attention better, is the question. Is that the goal with the strategy? But also, how can we get more Canadians in the South to care about a long-term plan for the North?
I would encourage people to look at the Arctic Focus site where we tell the stories there. Every time somebody sees a story of the Arctic, they get captivated. They're very captivating stories, whether it's, flora or fauna or the majesty of the nature or whatever. So I think, and we've got partners with major partners. I don't know if they're public yet, but major global media partners that we're launching stuff we've been doing at the elder camps, with the youth elder camps. And they've been, filming. If you can talk about it, Tom will talk tomorrow, but I won't mess it up. But I think the storytelling is really the best asset you've got if you want to draw the South into the North. And the question I would ask people here is, are you enabling storytelling as much as it could and should be? And I think you'll hook them. But let's say you've got 50 great hooks. Half a dozen are good to hook any person, but you got to kiss all the frogs to find the 4 or 5 hooks that are going to hook that person. But I don't believe you're absent a story that can hook just about everybody. You just got to tell it and have a vehicle for it. That's why we did the Arctic Focus. But if there's a better way to do it, or a partnership to do it, but nobody's rigid or possessive of how to do it. It's just not being done, so it was an enabling infrastructure.
I used to say, we the North needs to be more than just a slogan for the Raptors playoff runs. It needs to be something that all Canadians can connect with. On a similar vein, another question is, how do we get more people from the business sector interested in both the Arctic in terms of investments and in defense and security issues, the business sector?
Business is busy. Business job is to grow and prosper and make a return for that, painting within the lines of public policy they're given. They'll respond if there's a commercial opportunity, and if not, they won't. So there is a place for commerce once you invite them in to participate, but I think there's a bigger place for public policy that then fits commerce into it. The very complex issue is that there's economic scarcity in the north, but the economic opportunity interacts with natural capital. And how do you want to reconcile that? Or do you want to be the ones in the world that says, we'll suffer economically, but others in the world will say, I'll fulfill into the vacuum that you've not provided through your natural resources. So that's a conversation. I mean, it's going on right now, and we've ridden the brakes on a lot of stuff, but not as much as polemic. But then we've got prosperity issues, north and south. So, you know, that's they're hard questions. Yeah, hard questions.
The next question reminded me of my friend Shahir Gundi from Osler. I'm not sure if he's here today. He's speaking tomorrow. He wrote a rather not controversial, but sort of pushy essay on we should legislate more pensions to require investments in Canada. And this debate stimulated by Alberta, and now we've seen it a lot. Should pension funds be forced to invest more in Canada, or is their goal to have returns and not to be a giant ACOA? This question is on that line. How do we get global capital markets, pension funds, investment funds, something like CPPIB, to invest long-term in infrastructure projects? Obviously, there would have to be a return, but what's your view on this? I have my own view on mandating pension fund investment areas, but do you think this is something we should be looking at in Canada?
Yeah, well, and I've been involved in this. I published a big piece a couple of weeks ago in the Post on the mismanagement of economic policy for 40 years, in that as it moved from tangibles to intangibles, it became about an opposite toolkit from the tangible production economy. And that matters because if you don't have the proper policies, then capital goes to where it has the best opportunity. So I would say our pension funds invest a lot in infrastructure, invest a lot in tech. They just don't do it domestically. And it's not a self-loathing. I think it's that the enabling conditions for capital have not been created. That's a fundamental mismanagement of economic policy. However, they are creatures of public policy, and it's not an absurd idea to put some aspect of a double bottom line into their mandate, not unlike the case does in Quebec and many other sovereign funds do around the world. This sort of extreme neoliberalism, if you're 0.1% better that I invest in some return in some far-flung place, and I have absolutely no consideration for local spillovers, then should such a steely-eyed view be taken to these things? I don't think so, because the rest of the world is very nationalistic in how they think of their capital and their policy frameworks. However, the government has a role in appointing members of the board to these sources, these capital managers, and I know very directly they have not exercised their appointment structure to infuse some of that into it. So it naturally goes to what its culture has reinforced over the dominant economic ethos domestically over decades. So it's basically been a product of public policy, and we are where we are. If you want to unfurl it, I think you have to look fundamentally upstream as to how the global economy works, what's the nature of capacity to think through things, and then what is the core role of pools of capital in this post-neoliberal era. And the rules of the post-neoliberal era aren't set yet. we know we don't like the pure hard-edged neoliberalism pretty much. That's been discredited, but then what's the new world look like? And I talked a little bit about the unsettledness of it, because there isn't a consensus on how it's going to work now. So it'd be nice to have our capital integrated in coherent strategies where they don't feel they're being pistol whipped into something, but it's that they're a part of the national project and they're a part of generating where we want to go. But I don't think we've had that conversation. Now it's getting polemic, yanking out of the CPP and stuff like that. So yeah, I would put that as a rich part of a leadership discussion of policies for a post-neoliberal era, which I fund a lot of scholarships. We have about 23 of them on the Digital Hub at CG, where they're actually studying these post-neoliberal digital issues of climate financing and gig economy and AI and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just hoping that, 100 scholars a year will, over 4 or 5 years, create a capacity that builds the world that they want to live in.
Problem solvers.
You and I would be in our rocker chair by then.
Yeah,
rocking
right.
chair by then.
No, and I think the debate, I like how you phrase it, the double bottom line. I think this debate is starting. We're going to have a bit of it tomorrow. Other nations do it. It's having the conversation to make sure it's done responsibly. We only have a few minutes left, but I know you're going to like this question. There are a number of databases of Arctic research. Most are published documents, rarely without metadata. The raw data is very valuable. Data is the new oil. Northerners need access to its own data and help with evidence-based decision-making and all-domain awareness. Do you believe in this strategic approach, and is that how ARF is trying to approach its research, is allowing Indigenous peoples and this data to be available? It came up on our panels earlier this morning as well.
I'm very active in these data things as an intellectual protagonist globally, and I've been known for saying data is not the new oil, it's the new plutonium, because it's very powerful, but it can be weaponized against you, and inattention can cause even greater damage. So I don't think we have the weaponization issue as much in the Arctic, so it can, the oil metaphor can work there better than it can in, say, social media. I don't know the structure of how they're actually doing the data. I just know a lot of it's in different formats, in filing cabinets, it's baseline data. I don't think we've adopted standards for the tagging and extensions. For sure, why not have standards on metadata too? I would hope that's part, I'm sure it is part of it. And then when you throw these language models, these large models at them, they can chew on it in their ways and report what they report. But I don't know, but I'm told there's massive reservoirs of baseline data out there in all kinds of formats and all kinds of places. And they're if you can make those available, then you can set the clock at that time. Now, I know there's precision issues with instrumentation and sampling sizes and all that stuff, but still, it's got to be worth something. And then you have, if you bring that forward, you establish whatever language, like HTML and HTTP are not magic, they're just agreed to. And whatever you agree to, you make it valuable, not because it's inherently valuable, but because you agreed to it. That's what standards are, no more, no less. It's left-hand side's not better than right-hand drive car. Just pick one and stick to it, and everybody roll into it. So yeah, that would be my. I just see the opportunity to do more, and I think we're quite a bit behind what other nations are doing on this, and so it's an opportunity for
Low-hanging fruit.
Very low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last question, because this year marks, you talked about in your presentation, Jim, the ARF did 80% of the search for Erebus, and then 2 years later found the Terror. It's 10 years since the Erebus. Hard to believe it's 10 years. But that search then launched this incredible commitment to research, to engagement, to presence on the ground, to resources. That's been kind of the first 10 years or so of ARF. Where do you see the Arctic Research Foundation another 10 years from now? Where would you like to see that vision that you've invested a lot personally in go as public and institutions and governments start to step up to partner? Where do you want to see that leadership?
Thank you for asking the question, and thank you for people's attention. I would like to see more infusing into the fabric of science, shared infrastructure. I would like to, both terrestrial and on the water. I would like to see the use of data and our own models being world leading in whatever you're trying to understand nature better. And I would like to see the storytelling there. And I'd like to see a clear story. I guess I would like to see everything we're doing now just nicely more advanced and systematized and good connective tissue with all the actors that should have optimize what we have before us. So I don't see anything particularly new. I don't see anything being jettisoned. I would just like to see it. These are the gaps we've seen. We're trying to provide enabling capability, connective tissue, and I would just hope we move up our game and we're a part of a bigger fabric would be my hope.
Well, bigger fabric, connective tissue is really the goal of Arctic 360. Over the first 4 or 5 years of this conference, it's really bringing together thought leaders, institutions, governments, Indigenous leaders to build a cohesive plan, connect, have that strategy that's long-term, and then hopefully the goal each year for us collectively who care about these issues should be marking our own homework. Are we making progress in these areas that are in the strategy? As Rob said, the after-action report, I learned about that as a young military officer. How did you do, good or bad? After-action report, and I think that's a really special way Arctic 360 can keep us honest, keep us committed to that plan. But I want to thank you for a great chat. You've been a friend for many years. I've admired your work in the Arctic. I would love to go sing Stan Rogers up there with you one day, Jim. But thank you very much for your leadership, for your generosity, and for being here today. Thank you.